Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us at our third conference. This is our lead conference that we're hosting with Abuse Hurts. It is our pleasure to introduce yet another incredible team to yourselves. They will be sharing their stories, their successes, and their experiences at our lead conference with their organization that they've rolled out and their initiatives that they're rolling out across America. It is my extreme pleasure to introduce today Dr. Skip Rowland, Mr. Glenn Gregory, and Mr. Kevin Washington. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Kim will be leading the questions. We'll start with introductions. Dr. Skip, would you like to go first?
Yes, Laura, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Skip Rowland. A brief introduction would include I run a business, Banner Cross. We are a leadership development corporation, and we've been around since 1986, 1987. We work with a diversified client base, primarily in the Pacific Northwest, but I'm moving toward retirement status now. So I teach at Pacific Lutheran University. I teach graduate level marketing. Glenn?
Yes, so Glenn Gregory. I actually manage a wealth advisory firm, manage money professionally, and I've been doing that for 24 years. But the three of us, Kevin, Skip, and I, have worked well over 20 years together on local social justice initiatives here in the Seattle, Washington area. And one of the things recently, it was about 7 or 8 years ago, Skip and I created an organization called the Algonquin Group, and it's focused on strategies for narrowing the racial wealth gap. As an outgrowth of that, we came up with this framework that we're also promoting around inclusive capitalism, and how to make capitalism fairer and work better for society.
And I'm Kevin Washington. I've had a career in retail management and retail logistics. I retired a number of years ago. Now I'm doing a really bad job of semi-retirement, serial board member, involved in education, social justice issues, and working with Skip and Glenn.
Okay, welcome everyone. We're so excited to have you here today for this conversation. So I have a series of questions I'm just going to ask, and then you can, whoever wants to answer it, or if you all want to contribute, please feel free. So let's start with the general question of, can you tell us a little bit about your work and specifically how it might relate to intimate partner violence?
Yeah, I'll start. We come from a community, the American African American community, that feels as though it has been politically and economically oppressed. The anecdotal evidence to that I experienced in my home when my father came home with race-related frustrations from oppression and physically abused our family. Not so much beating us and punching us, but using bad language, being upset about everything. And it was clear that the reason for his agitation was he felt denied because of his race opportunities to move his family forward and establish his family. Also in my neighborhood were routine stories of male abuse to females in homes where basically the issue was money. And last but not least, we come from a culture that gave men permission to lead their family using corporal punishment if necessary to gain compliance and conformity. I'll put a period in it there and let Glenn talk about where his comes from.
Yeah, no, I think you've articulated very well the central thesis, Skip, that based on the history and legacy actually here in the United States from slavery and the legacy of slavery, there are just innate indoctrination practices, I would call it, that occurred within the family unit limit the potential, right? To instill within the minds of African American family members that they were less than, they never could achieve. And I think you're looking at three men that didn't buy into that, But I think what we're trying to do is get to a place where everyone gets to be able to seek their highest potential. And how do we, sort of hack the code around that?
Another important piece is how do we rebuild the family? Over the last 20, 30 years, there's been a lot of studies about the African American family in particular, other minority families, and as has been mentioned, the results have not been very positive, and the families themselves and the communities don't get to see very many positive role models or enough positive role models in order to change the culture, because we need to change the culture both within the African American and minority communities. Then we need to deal with the majority culture who's been in control of things, and they too have some work to do, but that work doesn't necessarily have to be done by those that have been oppressed for the last 400 years. So there's two pieces of big work that need to take place, but we're focusing on how do we help the African American community raise awareness, raise its skill level, support each other around this economic piece, intimate violence piece, and rebuilding the culture and community.
Yeah, and if I could make a comment around culture, Kevin did touch on an important aspect of what we do in culture. Or at least I do, I use a Africana studies framework around this. And when we say culture, what we're really trying to say is what are the normative behaviors that are agreed upon within this group, this organization, whatever, this collective. And it is those normative behaviors that drive certain outcomes, right? In addition to that, we have a governance structure that will impose certain limitations through policy and that kind of thing, but they are separate. And within the African American community, we have cultural norms, right? Normative behaviors. Within that same group, we also have a governance structure. And even outside of the group as American citizens, it's the same way, right? We have a culture, but we also have a governance structure.
And just to bring it home, let's say violence has been normalized in our community. So in order to keep someone who doesn't want to stay subordinate, you may have to use violence to keep that person in position and give that person permission to use violence against those who are hierarchically below them. You see this in police work. Police work in America is very different from police work in London, England. Police in America are allowed to use a lot of violence to bring the culture to order. And that's because violence has been built into our culture. If you look at the Wild West, Al Capone, all those pseudo heroes that we have, these are people that get what they want through violent means. So that's why we do our work. We love our families. Glenn realized one day that our community was not structured for wealth to be passed on from generation to generation. That means you have perpetual poverty. And if you have perpetual poverty in the capitalist system, you're going to have perpetual violence. And it's going to be frustrated fathers against frustrated mothers, frustrated children against frustrated parents. But family violence is how you keep a family unit down. If everybody's fighting, if dad is mad at mom and mom is mad at the kids, then they don't sit around the dinner table and plan strategies for change. They nurse their wounds, they nurse their grudges, and they look forward to getting even. So back to you, Kim.
All right. So that was a great transition to the next question, actually. So I understand that you have built a program around families to talk about wealth and how to pass on generational wealth or create generational wealth. So what have you learned from building this program, and how do you feel it has impacted your community?
Hmm.
Well, go ahead,
oh,
Glenn.
go ahead. No, you go first, Skip.
Okay, well, I said Glenn to go ahead because Glenn kicked off the learning. Glenn came to me and said, hey, Skip, we need to shift our focus. He had a discussion with his son. Glenn, go ahead and tell the story. I don't need to tell you the story.
Yeah, so back in, I guess it was back in 2018, I read an article from the New York Times, and it was titled "Extensive Data Shows Punishing Reach of Racism for Black Boys." And after reading that article, I was really shaken. The thesis of the article described how Black boys who lived in the top, so there was a professor, Piketty, I think his name is, or not Piketty, Chetty, Raj Chetty. Piketty's a different professor. But there was Professor Raj Chetty. He did a study. It was a huge study of socioeconomic movements among children. In other words, if you started at one of the 5 socioeconomic levels, poor, lower middle class, upper middle class, or wealthy, based on income, not on wealth, but on income, where do you wind up in life? And so the article described how children in the top quartile, or quadrant, had a much less, or had a much lower probability of maintaining that socioeconomic status as adults, right? In other words, if you were in the top economic quartile and your life happens, where do you wind up? Only 18% of the time, 17 or 18% of the time, would you wind up as an adult in that top quartile. So what the study showed was there was actually downward mobility in socioeconomic downward mobility with respect to Black boys. So I read that, and I saw myself first. I was like, well, how is that possible? These are theoretically the folks who have all of the economic advantages. They got all of the resources to put their kids in great schools and live in great neighborhoods and all this sort of stuff. How could you only have an 18% probability? Now, conversely, on the other end, and I had to go, and really read through the research paper to find this. It wasn't in the article, but at the other end of the spectrum was Asian women. If you were in the top quartile, you had a 52% probability of maintaining the top socioeconomic quadrant, and between the top quadrant and the upper middle, it was like 2/3, right? So I said, how could this possibly be? What is going on? And I reached out to many people. Of course, I reached out to Skip and some of my close friends. No one could really understand this. So between Skip, Kevin, and myself, we actually conducted a little research project. We pulled in some folks for a focus group. We spoke to men and we spoke to women. We separated those groups specifically because as a money manager, I've learned there's, especially when you're talking about money and husbands and why, things can get, one person can dominate the top conversation, right? So you're better, but separating them as they talk. But the learnings that we found, I think, were enlightening. And that's really what set us on this path, right? And we came up with what we think is a great way of trying to implement change through individual agency, right? Just like, well, first of all, the Algonquin Group is completely self-funded by us. We don't seek corporate donations. We don't seek outside donations. we're just a group of guys that want to do well for society and our communities. And so we're trying to figure this stuff out where other people have not tread, mainly because we believe we're eminently qualified. I mean, I know investments, and Skip and Kevin know business and social justice and that sort of thing. So we came together, and we're hoping to make a difference. I'll pause there.
Senator Skip, do you want to add?
Well, yeah, my learnings went in a different area and followed sort of like your model of learn, leverage, lead. So for me, the first learning was, where is the edge? Where do you get to a place where you see shifts or culture? So I began to study history. I wanted to know, when did capitalism begin? What were the foundational tenets of capitalism? And I found that capitalism and some of our religions basically came about at the same time. As kings and queens established their kingdoms and empires, they were the capitalists. And they built societies around their families and created belief systems that supported the leadership of their families over other families, and begin to come up with ideas. Like in marketing, I'm a marketing professor, so I know what an idea is. It's just that, neuron structures in the cells of the brain firing. But if people don't know that, if your consciousness level is above the consciousness level of the people you're dealing with, then you can play games in their mind. If you know what I mean. Well, you dating. If my consciousness is above the person's consciousness I'm dating, that's why they don't let adults date kids, right? Because they have very different levels of consciousness. So for me, I had to learn, how long has this thing been set up this way? And how long have certain people been sacrificed for other people? And is that an inevitable part of our culture? And what I've learned is, yeah, that's the way our culture works. So to leverage that, I partnered with Glenn and said, okay, how do we get this information into our community? And since he already had the answer, through the family, and by building strong families. We can go out here and build a strong men's group, but then if we go home to weak families, we can't make any movement. If my wife and I are not in alignment, doesn't matter if me and Glenn and Kevin are in alignment. So we realized that we had to encourage families to align themselves around a couple things. Number one, the American economic system. I don't understand the Canadian economic system, but I understand this one.
But we know settler colonialism was part of both. So
yeah, I do. But the Canadians responded a little bit differently over time. And I've worked in Canada. So, understand the history of it and understand the definite social roles that this culture expects you to play. And one of them is a dominant male role. Mm-hmm. And with a modern woman, that just doesn't work. All right, you're going to have family conflict if you try to put old-fashioned values in a modern family household. You're going to have conflict, and that conflict is going to make it difficult for you to educate your kids and change your status. So another thing that I've learned is the importance of design. The kings and queens designed it this way. They designed the systems to function and interact, and then they've had 2,500 years to perfect them. If they keep their families intact while mine's fooling around trying to find itself, they will control the levels of productivity, which are economic, educational, political, and cultural. Cultural, they're controlled through the church; economic, through the banks; politically, through the elected systems; and educationally, through the universities and higher ed. So that's sort of what I realized, that we have to fight these challenges through the family unit and empower families to learn how to train itself to vote. And that empowerment process is the leadership plan that we could talk about later. But Kevin, what have you learned?
Well, one of the things that I've learned and observed is that this work isn't necessarily siloed. If our focus is trying to make change in an economic sense, we've got several other areas where we need to play a role. We need to raise awareness. We need to bring people's skill levels up in order to be able to accomplish that. Skip mentioned those 4 arenas. They're some of the focus of our work and sort of the pillars of the work that we need to do in order to make this happen. Unfortunately, it does make our job a little bit more difficult because we've got to embrace a few more categories of work than we had originally planned, but that's all right. That's the path. It makes sense to us, and if we can help families improve their situations, then that's the target.
Yeah, and if I can anchor us in what those categories are that we're trying to impact, as Kevin alluded to, the first is psychology and mindset. The second is family dynamics. The third is outside forces. And then the last one is wants, needs, and desires. We came upon those categories based on the analysis of our focus group findings.
That's fantastic. And I really think that for me, after going through the other 2 conferences and this one, this idea of a family-based approach, I think is very significant and sort of a new way to look at things. So it would be great if you could tell us a little bit more about why you think taking a family-based approach, or how you think taking a family-based approach could have a significant impact on reducing intimate partner violence. I know your program specifically addresses wealth and finances, but if you could share some thoughts on how it might also reduce intimate partner violence, that would be great.
Well, sociologically, the family is the basic social unit. The individual is not the basic social unit. The basic social unit is the family. And so now we get into politics, okay? How do you define a family nowadays? And when I was coming up, it was simple. You know, a mother and a father and kids, everybody knew that. And everybody knew the roles in that family. So I personally feel, and I'll let Glenn and Kevin share their own feelings, and that is that the family is still the basic family unit. That how people choose to set up their families is up to people. And I have my old archaic thoughts about how it should be, and I am going to have to change my thinking in order to continue this focus the way we want to, because families are just not set up the way they were when I was a child. So the family is the basic social unit. It is the nurturing unit for young human life. Without families being strong, especially in the first 5 to 10 years of a person's life, it can be almost impossible to civilize them. If between birth and 5, they're not given certain values, if between birth and 5, they're not encouraged, to higher dreams, then they might, never realize the full capability of their psychic nature. So that's my point. Glenn, Kevin?
Yeah, I would harken back to, again, the focus group research. I think there is at least here in the States, this belief that Black people are broken, right? That we need governance structures to impose certain strictures because, all Black people are broken. Now, I think, first of all, that's nonsense, right? To say all Black people are, it just makes no sense. But that is kind of a white supremacist framework that is meant to, again, hold people into a specific socioeconomic status. So once we were able to kind of set that aside or discard it as just out of hand crazy, we actually began to listen to what the folks in the focus group said. And what they said was that, well, and again, we viewed this through the lens of wealth, but I think there are some learnings important for our discussion today. What we saw is that people really dealt with money and wealth through an emotional lens, and that's because financial literacy was low. Also, interestingly, these Black men that we spoke to viewed the family as a matriarchy, and that was a real rushlight for me. They connected the family as a matriarchy because of the legacy of slavery, right? Where men were often sold away, leaving mothers as a point of stability. Later on, it was through government strictures that actually would not allow men in households in order to obtain government benefits. There was also this strong need to exert control over things, right? Particularly children. And the parents wanted their kids to face hardships early. And they felt that was important to build character. Now they believed this even though they had the financial resources to make life much easier for them, right? Because I should also note, the people who we brought into the focus group were all in the top socioeconomic level, right? Mm-hmm. Now, why does that matter to what we're talking about? There's a process of indoctrination that appears to be taking place, and that indoctrination is leading to patterns and themes of behavior, right? If we can break the cycle, right? If we can break the cycle, especially around this need to exert control and to almost punish young kids, right? I think we've got a chance. I think we've got a chance of making significant progress.
Mm-hmm.
Part of our challenge is that we need to do work with the families. We need to do work with kids. We've got to do work with structures and systems, because the current structures and systems have not been very supportive of kids and families here in the United States, despite the fact that, for example, during COVID, we had a particular set of proposals passed that reduced child poverty by almost half. And now we've got Republicans who want to do away with that policy, send the kids back into poverty. And it's like they don't recognize and realize the impact that has on kids and families and how difficult that makes things. You would think that they believe, oh, this is a great idea. Now half the kids are out of poverty. How do we raise the other, kids out of it? But no, they want to move just the opposite direction. And so we've got a bunch of elements that we need to deal with in parallel to moving our ideas forward. We got a couple of big fights on our hands.
Mm-hmm.
And the number one thing we have to do in families is deal with male egos.
Mm.
When you give someone the kind of spiritual power that maleness has been given by society, it can lend individuals that don't either understand the spiritual power or choose to interpret it in a way that gives them dominance. And if we don't change that, if I as a man am not given, now being born and raised in a matriarchy, Glenn and Kevin and I have had a lot of training as to how do young men, how do middle-aged men, how do old men treat women, how do they treat their kids? But not everybody gets that message. And power is a very difficult thing to give up once you have it, especially if you don't have all consuming power. You just have power in your home. When you come in your home, you can act like a king. That means you can do whatever you want to whoever's in there. And that has been a practice in our family. So unless we change that and get men and women used to a shared in-home power system, that's why I like to focus on the family, because it allows us to talk about strategic and tactical power. Go ahead, Kevin. You look like you got another question ready for us.
I do, but oh, Kevin, sorry.
Well,
Go ahead, Kevin.
go ahead with your question, Kim.
Okay, I was just going to say, I think that this is such a great conversation, and I want to just highlight that what you were just talking about, Skip, is I've seen it in a multitude of cultures, and we've heard stories where that exact thing, I think, plays a significant part, because it might be the only place that someone feels power. And I think that's really, I just wanted to highlight that, because I think that's something that we all need to listen to and really hear as we're having these conversations. And it leads to the next conversation, which is part of our LEAD conference. Part of the idea is that we're looking at future possibilities, and we're looking at things that we should consider as organizations. So we have many organizations that attend. We have the makeup of the conferences has been community partner organizations and Indigenous organizations and police organizations and victim services. So our population that's attending these conferences make up a community, basically. And my last question is, what guidance would you give to these community partners? And when I say community partners, we're thinking the broad spectrum: healthcare, police, shelter systems, people who work with the homeless. Like, think very, very broadly about community. And what advice would you give to these community partners who are trying to create programming or support, particularly for the detection and prevention of intimate partner violence?
Well, when Glenn put the idea together, the first thing he came up with, and I joined him on, was a conference. And although we didn't target the conference at families, in our follow-up conversations, we said we would target families. We would invite families to come to the conference as a unit. And then we could run different strands. We could run a strand on economic development, family at the family level. What does it mean to have a family economic development plan? And then we could run things off of it in the cultural side of it. We could talk about gender relationships that make financial planning easier, not harder. In the political strand, we could talk about how do we use our votes to make sure that we're putting people in office to give us favorable cultural policies and favorable financial policies. Now, the reason why I mentioned Glenn kicking this off, the two suggestions that he made that are the foundations of inclusive capitalism will take care of a lot of the violence. And that is a guaranteed annual income and guaranteed medical health care. Glenn, you want to take it from there?
Yeah, I mean, and I'm going to credit Kevin with bringing this concept to the Algonquin Group. It's a concept that he learned down in Stanford, which is human-centered design, right? That what it, if I could advise people, how do you approach this in a comprehensive way that will lead to systemic change, it is to simply be focused on the individual and that individual's specific needs, not the imposition of, these programs or services that are designed by people who may not have even been a part of the community, but which are funded for various reasons, and don't truly lead to systemic change. I think it's just very, very important that we take people where they are. Now, that's the first thing. The second thing is to realize that economics plays a huge role. how capitalism plays out in society plays a huge role in human interaction. Therefore, if certain, I'll call them malefactors because I think they are doing harm to our society. If certain malefactors are earning money, right, they're achieving an economic gain off of their behaviors, but those behaviors lead to harm. We have two choices as a society. We can work with programs and services that are in fact just Band-Aids, right, that help people cope with the trauma that they experience as part of whatever it is they're dealing with. Or we can seek to actually go deeper, right, to the root cause and try to eliminate that problem from the beginning. I think we as a society have to decide what approach are we going to take. I know what our approach is, right? But there are well-funded organizations out there, right, that have a choice.
And sometimes those choices actually do impose more harm. As treasurer for the Seattle Foundation, the largest community foundation here in Seattle, I made some efforts to see if we could put forth some design thinking elements into how the foundation worked. The foundation employed people. Another example is the Gates Foundation. They've got a bunch of people with lots of letters after their name, and they go into communities and they say, here, do this, and your ills will go away and everything will be all right. The ideas weren't invented there. They had nothing to do with what took place there. They didn't empower the people who lived there and had to stay in the community. And you wonder why the solutions don't work. We tried a particular project where we brought in the people that we wanted to impact, gave them roles to play in both the design of the solution, the implementation of the solution, the review of the solution, and kept up that iterative cycle. And the difference in that particular project was just amazing. And those people, one, they got what they needed. It wasn't everything all at once, but they were part of the solution. When we brought them in before the board could see these people could not stop grinning. They were so pleased at how different the organization's approach had been and now how effective the solutions were. The organizations, Kim, that you mentioned bringing in to your conferences, all of those organizations will need to learn to do the work of how to become more holistic in their approaches, how to be more inclusive when it comes to the solutions. And yes, there are lots of spinning plates of tasks that need to be done, but if it was easy, it would have been done yesterday. And unfortunately, it's not easy. It does involve work. We have to move people from where they are after meeting them where they are to a place that empowers them and enables them to take more control of their lives, move forward in a sustainable fashion, treat each other better, eliminate these fearship processes for managing their personal lives and their home lives, and totally eliminate these impacts on women, children who often don't have the skill sets, often don't see very many examples or role models to empower them. And those people need to be empowered and engaged in this work as well, so that they can see that there's a path forward for them.
Thank you, Kevin. I feel so blessed to have had this conversation with the three of you today. It's I love the idea of human-centered design. It's actually a passion of mine as well. And I think that it's really the only way that you can create solutions that get to an outcome that everyone might be looking for. And I carry that very close to my heart. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that. We just have a couple of minutes. I'll just open the floor to anyone for any final comments.
Yeah, I just want to thank you ladies for contacting Miriam and I. We had not discussed intimate partner violence in connection with capitalism. We figured everybody understood that, from the slaves being beat half to death, from the families being split up just to make money, from, you know, the police beating us to death in the streets and kneeling on our necks with their knees. We just thought everybody understood that when you put people under tremendous pressure and you compress them into a 2x4 apartment, a family of 4 living in 800 square feet with not enough money, not enough nutrition, but that's how you create a dependent class. And if I'm in power, I got 2 wars, right? If I'm Putin, I got 2 wars, right? If I'm in Israel right now, I got 2 wars, right? The war outside my country is trying to come in, and the war inside my country trying to change the status quo.
Yeah.
If you want to maintain a status quo that is designed to be asymmetric in the distribution of opportunities and benefits, it's going to have conflicts. The question is, where do you focus those conflicts? Our culture has focused those conflicts in the poor, and we make up most of the poor in America, so we eat the most of the conflict. So thank you for helping us to connect that not only is, you know, our wealth at stake. When we say wealth, we're not really talking about stacks of cash in the corner. We're talking about quality of life. In order to have a quality of life in America, you have to have some wealth. So I'll put a period in it there. Thank you. Fellas?
I think you said it for us, Skip.
Okay.
And I hope, you know, whatever we said is helpful to your audience.
And a quick question that I would have would be, in your past conferences, have there been some points that were brought forth that you feel are opportunities for your organization to engage in or to do more work in? Something that, like when we thought about this intimate violence piece, was something like, well, okay, wow, how do we miss that? Are there some other elements that in your work you've seen that you've been missing that you might also need to address?
Well, the surprising revelation that I had in an earlier conversation with Skip was that we hadn't had someone present on specifically a family type intervention. So we had, you know, a group speak about bringing women from a community together and doing work with women. And we had other groups talk about, you know, there was a gentleman who talked about gang interventions and helping women sort of make change in that area. And we've had survivors speak about their challenges, but this idea of—
We've even had a men's group speak as well about how they need to work with men and women.
So but bringing the family unit together, I don't recall that. And I think I've watched every single one of the presentations that have occurred. So it just adds to the richness of what we're bringing to the table. And the purpose of these conferences are to learn from each other, transfer knowledge, so that we can then approach program design, prevention, detection, intervention in a different way, learning from everybody and the strengths that people bring to the table. So that's been my learning, Kevin, just in this conversation, and really reminding everyone about the importance of the individual within that unit, that human-centered design, and how do we not have blinders on to all of the malfactors or factors that are contributing to someone's experience. Laura, did you want to add anything?
I just want to say I was riveted. Like, this is one of those walked away from. I've been left with so much to think about, and it's incredible work that you're doing. So you should all be very proud of the efforts that you've put into this. And it's something that I know the people that will be participating in this are going to be very interested in learning from, will take away from, and there will be further conversation with all of you and the groups that we've been a part of. This is not a goodbye, it's a see you later at the end of this conversation. So we will continue this because it's great work that you're doing. It's great work that we're all doing, and there's lots of opportunity to continue to collaborate on the things that we're sharing and situations that we're working on improving together. So without much further ado, as it is 2:00 now, I want to thank all of you from the Algonquin Group for participating in this event and activity at the LEAD conference. For everybody watching this, if you would like to learn more, please go to their booth. You will see it in the exhibit hall on the right-hand side of the screen. And if you have any further questions, their contact information and details will be in there. You are welcome to reach out to them, or Kim and I as facilitators as well will be able to get you in touch with them for further discussions. Thank you, gentlemen. Grateful for all of your time, and we look forward to continuing our talks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to meet both of you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Okay.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye now.